So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Jonathan Watts Hall. I'm the Director for Student Success here at the System Office. Really curious to know who's sort of come in the room. I'm going to open up a quick poll. Some of you may have seen them before. There's going to be a poll that's going to pop up. You may need to scroll down a little bit to see all the options, but I'm just kind of curious who's in the room. So if as you see it, go ahead and click the button. Let us know who you are, what unit you're coming from. And we'll just sort of get a sense of the room. This will help us to understand a bit more about the audience we've got. Give it a few more minutes. Looks like most folks have voted. Again, just if you'll click who you're from, where you're from, we'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So you got about 5 more seconds left. And so there we are. We're a quarter of the room are advisors. So another 17% academic administration. So good to have you here. Again, appreciate y'all joining us today for this Lunch and Learn on Chatbots. So, over the past few years, there's been this explosion in artificial intelligence-driven natural language assistants, which are, I think, we'll just call them chatbots. So these chatbots are tools that can respond to inquiries and route requests for assistance, gather critical information about emerging and persistent needs. They're also available 24/7. They extend the time of day when support can be available to, and they can make sure that assistance is available to students when they may need it. These tools have been around for a while, but they've rapidly moved into higher education over the past few years as the technology matures and as institutions sought to meet students where they needed, particularly as students moved towards text, more online, and also had needs that were off hours. So this expansion became even more critical when the pandemic hit and students shifted off campus. Our services oftentimes were closed, or campuses were telling students that their access to campus should be restricted. And as a result, a number of USG institutions have established chatbots, have moved into this space and virtual assistants to support their students. Now, among the institutions that were first out of the gate with chatbots was Georgia State. They launched Pounce back in 2016. And so we're joined today to talk a bit about their experience by Scott Burke. He's the Associate Vice President for Undergraduate Admissions and Housing at Georgia State University, and also Lindsay Fifield, who is the Project Director for Chatbot programs at Georgia State. A little later on today, we're going to be hearing from Tracy Ireland here at the System Office. He's Associate Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Services. And he's been instrumental in the rollout of Campus Logic, which is a financial aid tool that also includes a configurable chatbot that's available to institutions. So that's our program for the day. But I'm going to go ahead and start off today with Lindsay and Scott, and I'm going to shift my spotlight over to them and invite them to take the stage. So if y'all want to take it away.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate that. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our session this morning. As Jonathan so eloquently put, Georgia State was one of the first in the nation to introduce an AI-enhanced chatbot text messaging platform into our admissions process. I was charged with, by my boss, with actually trying to figure out a way to lower our growing summer melt issue. For those of you that are not aware of what summer melt is that percentage of students who say or commit to your institution in some form or fashion, whether it's through a deposit, whether it's through an intent to enroll process, say that they're going to come to your institution and don't actually end up in the enrolled class. And at our height, we were at an 18% melt rate. So we were leaving lots of students behind. And so my boss, Dr. Tim Rennick, at the time asked me to continue to look at ways that we could decrease that we could personalize the admissions process in such a way where we could decrease that summer melt. And that often is misinterpreted or misdefined by admissions offices as really happening just in the summer. And we certainly know that summer melt begins much earlier than that, as students are being admitted, as they are starting to go through the next step process with you, which for many students, especially those of you that might have early admissions processes, you can begin to see students slipping in January and February and March, and obviously throughout the summer. And so we had the opportunity, we were in the process of looking for a vendor that could help us add another tool to our toolbox that would allow us to target students in a more personalized way. And we had a desire to text message students. We just didn't know exactly what was out there. And so we had spent several months going through the process of looking for a vendor that could help us deliver text messages to students. But we also wanted the ability to have a two-way conversation with a student. We didn't want it to just be a one-way where we push a message out and that we hope the student takes the actions that we want them to. And so that's where the vendor that we ended up with, AdmitHub, really stood out amongst all of the vendors that we were ultimately looking at. And so we signed a contract with them in 2016, in February of 2016, and we deployed our first chatbot messaging campaign in April of 2016. And the chatbot provides student access to a knowledge base of over 2,000 questions and answers, and allows us to send them reminders, set up guided tutorials, and to send surveys. This is something, these features are things we knew we wanted in the platform that we were going to use. We wanted the ability to send those text messages. We wanted to use them as reminders of those things that students needed to be doing to become successfully enrolled students. As we were having conversations with AdmitHub and our vendor, we learned about this idea of having guided tutorials where we could walk a student through some aspect of our process. And we have very complex ones, like for our FAFSA process, where Pounce can actually walk a student through filling out the FAFSA, to parking, to any number of other things that students need to be doing to become successfully enrolled students. And by simply sending us a text message, a student can have their question answered in a matter of seconds, right? We wanted a platform that was going to be able to provide students that additional support that they needed to ask any question that they wanted to. So we spent a great deal of time seeding our knowledge base. Lindsay, you can go to the next slide. Seeding our knowledge base so that Pounce could answer routine questions about dates and deadlines and admissions requirements, about academics, about housing, residential life, student life, to far more complex questions about financial aid, financing their education. For students that were interested in setting up a campus tour to come visit, the Pounce has the ability to guide and help a student do that. They have information about athletics built into that. The other great thing about the platform is that it allows us to monitor trends. It allows us to see the types of questions that students are asking. So within our dashboard, we have the ability to actually watch and monitor conversations that are going on with our chatbot. So when a student sends in that text message, it goes into a platform that we have the ability to monitor and watch. So if we see a spike in financial aid questions, if we see a spike in housing questions, if we see a spike in questions asking about their bills, or what do I do next, we have the ability to change direction in our communication flow that we send out through our CRM system. And some of those campaigns that were on the last slide, we have the ability to tailor those in such a way to meet the needs of students who have not yet performed this action, right? The goal is to get them to perform the action, but students don't always follow in lockstep exactly our next steps. Many of them are doing these out of order in some cases. There are some in which they can't, but for a good majority of these, the students are doing the ones that they feel, one, they can get done quickly, that they've gotten some guidance on, and they get those done. But we need to continue to be able to remind them that that they need to do these things and that they have a resource that can help guide them through this whole process. And that's how we came about setting up all of these various different communication campaigns. These text messaging campaigns was through how students were guiding through and walking through and completing their next steps for and during the admissions process. And so we right now have well over 100 different campaigns that we can deploy over the course of the admission cycle, depending upon where that student is in the next steps for accepted students. Next slide. Over the last 5 years, we have introduced Pounce to tens of thousands of students. This is a representation of what we've been doing on the admission side, and Lindsay is obviously going to talk about what we're doing on the retention side. But in our first year, we did what we call a randomized control trial. We wanted the ability to see if Pounce was going to have an effect on getting students to do the things that we need them to do. So what we decided to do was to introduce the bot to half of our admits in our randomized control trial. And then the other half of students only got the messaging, the things that we would normally do during our admissions process, so that we had a way to judge whether or not the chatbot was being effective, whether it was reaching the students that we needed it to reach ultimately. And I was so glad that we did that. And then the year after that, in 2017, based on the results that we saw with the increases in enrollment that we saw with the reduction of student melt, we then introduced it to all of the students in 2017. So to date, we've sent over 1.5 million messages out to students through the platform. We've even started in year 2 and more so in year 3, we actually started communicating with prospects as well. So previously, the first couple of years, we were really focused on yield and admitted students. But as we saw the success of the bot and the impact that it was having on our ability to communicate with the students in a more personalized way, we also began utilizing it for things like application deadline reminders and applying for financial aid and making sure that they're prepared prior to and in the prospective student phase, and understanding how and when they can engage the financial aid process. So we started moving some of that messaging earlier, as well as we do in our comm flow. In our email comm flow, we wanted to complement that in our text messaging comm flow as well too. One of the great things also about the platform is that we've been able to automate a lot of the responses. So a lot of the very routine questions that Pounce gets, he is able to answer. And so in that first year, we saw an automation rate, or Pounce responding to 91.5% of the questions that were being asked of him. And only a small percentage were going to Georgia State staff, as well as AdmitHub staff that was helping us monitor our dashboard in that first year. We have now fully taken over the responsibility of triage, and we'll get more into that as we go along. But AdmitHub is not providing us with the same level of support that they did in the first year, and we've had to staff up and hire a few more staff members to help us with that. And we have fully deployed chatbots for our bachelor's degree seeking students, as well as for our associate's degree seeking students. Next slide. And so next we're going to transition over to Lindsay, where she's going to introduce you to the retention bot. And then we're also going to get into something that Jonathan teased in the beginning of his remarks about using it during COVID, or what we call that critical communication time. And so it's not only been very successful in just those routine and everyday things that we want students to complete, but it also helped us during some really critical moments during COVID of getting responses to things that we needed very, very quickly, and did it very, very successful. But I want to just leave with this thought, and then I'll turn it over to Lindsay. I think it's important to understand that the chatbot is not a silver bullet. It is one of many tools that we use in our strategic marketing and outreach plan. And due to its effectiveness in lowering summer melt, we move this technology beyond the admissions process and deployed a retention bot for our continuing population. So let me turn it over to Lindsay.
Unmute. Thanks, Scott. So like Scott mentioned, with kind of the success that we had seen using this technology in the admission space, we knew that we wanted to try it out in the retention space too. So much like Scott, we kind of started our journey in the chatbot space with a randomized control trial where half of the students who we could text were getting some messages, the other half weren't. Because at Georgia State, we knew we were communicating around the barriers for success, right? So we knew we were communicating about completing FAFSAs, registering for your class, removing a hold, but our students still weren't responding completely. So we knew there was some benefits to kind of to engaging students in a different way around these kind of critical benchmarks to success. So we thought Pounce would be a great way to kind of intervene there. At Georgia State, how we deploy our retention chatbot is kind of centered around the Office of Student Success. So it is a very coordinated approach that works with a lot of different offices on campus. We work with Student Financial Services, we work with the Registrar's Office, Student Advisement, Study Abroad, Career Services. We really do try to work with all of the offices that could lead to student success to create a very kind of targeted communication strategy for the student. So with everything that we send out, we really try to think very critically about what are we trying to get the student to do, but also how does the student feel like this message is just to them? You know, we really do want to avoid the idea of kind of blasting students. So we really tried to dig in here and create a very coordinated approach that also held very closely to this for the student to feel like it was very targeted just to them. So, and what that kind of led us to was to create some messages that look like this. So these are 3 kind of examples of our text message. Because one of the benefits of this type of technology, particularly when it's delivered via text, is that you have the ability to speak differently to the student, if that makes sense. So it gives you a much more kind of peer-based relationship with the student than it is coming from an office. So if financial aid has communicated about a SAP procedure with the student and the student isn't taking action, maybe in this much more friendly and approachable forum, what have they asked? What have they encouraged the action? Would students actually respond to that? So this lets us kind of not only create messages that seem specific to students, but also kind of destigmatize some procedures that might seem harder for students, right? So whether it's FAFSA completion or verification, to let the student know, like, even though that might seem like a very big hurdle for you, there's a small step you can take right now to kind of lean towards that. So it very much, this type of communication could take something that is a little bit scarier for the student, or the student just doesn't want to deal with, and present it in a way that seems achievable for them. So I mentioned before, it is a very coordinated approach. This existing communication coming from the offices at the university, and that it really is used to supplement that communication. So a lot of times we will work with the offices as they send out an email, a communication, we'll send a very complimentary text that is very different in nature to try to engage the student around what that email was kind of intended for. So we all know open rates on emails are very low. Turns out open rates on text messages are very high. And so to use the text to re-engage the student either with the email or to work together with the email, or even the concept, became a pretty powerful way for us to do it. The other thing we saw was the more specific we could get the message, the more likely students were to respond. So this is an example of actually some A/B testing we did around an academic coach, right? So this was students we were encouraging to take up some academic coaching. And as you can see, the message on the left actually mentions the coach's name, right? So it says your academic coach's name, are you ready to see Samia? And versus the other one. And when we looked at the impacts, it was absolutely higher on the coaches who had their names listed. So students who were given their coach's name actually saw the coach at a higher percentage than students who didn't. So, and all of these types of messages were deployed in that randomized control trial setting. And what we were able to really see through that was it did have an impact, right? So we were looking at control and treatment groups and how one group who was getting the text messages were responding differently. And we saw really significant impacts across some of these more common barriers to enrollment. So a higher percentage of students getting the text messages were engaging with financial aid. Much more of them, less of them were withdrawing for balance issues. More of them were taking care of their holds. They were registering earlier in the cycle, which meant these kind of high risk kids were seeking help earlier, which again helps not only the office, but also the student. So this impact kind of across creating this kind of centralized, coordinated communication plan that also had this very casual comfort and personalization to it really started to make an impact with students. And particularly, we were able to kind of leverage this work we had already done when COVID came, right? So the game changed entirely for everyone about a year ago. And Scott's going to talk you through a little bit of those, but we do have some messages we sent out during COVID just to better walk you guys through that. Scott, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Second time, bingo. We also used it very effectively during the pandemic by seeding Pounce with COVID-19 related questions and answers, as well as communicating information about important information about changes to campus activity, including office hours and housing updates. And in fact, last March, we had to quickly move students out of our residence halls due to the pandemic, right? And as we all know, the response rates to email at times can be abysmal. And so we were able to deploy 2 very successful campaigns that allowed us to get very quick responses from students about whether they needed more time to be able to move out. You know, many of them were coming back from spring break and weren't prepared for having to immediately move out. We've got a number of students that live well outside of our area that may be out-of-state students, could be international students. And so we deployed a survey out to over 3,600 students. And we got a real large number of responses in a very, very quick time period within 2 hours of whether or not students were prepared, ready to go, need some additional extensions or assistance before they can successfully move out of their residence halls. And then the next one, the next campaign that we deployed was the actual, again, move out campaign. So the first one was, did the student need any type of an extension in terms of moving out? And then this one was, I plan to move out of GSU housing. I need an extension to March 29th, or I need to remain in housing for the rest of the semester because I don't have any other place to go. And again, we went to over 3,600 students. 46% of the students responded within the first 24 hours. We kept that campaign going to the point of where we got to 100% of the actual students responding to this. I can't imagine what the results would have been if we had to try to do this via email or even trying a calling campaign. We know how unsuccessful at times our calling campaigns. We leave lots of voicemail messages, and it can be very, very, very frustrating. So we also complemented this with an email campaign, but we weren't solely just relying on email as a way for us to get responses back to and from the students. And we needed, in some cases, to get those responses back within 24 to 48 hours, so that we understood where we were situated with many of these students. Is this me or you?
I got it.
Yeah, so, I'll turn it over to you, Lindsay, on this one.
Awesome. So like Scott said, not only were we communicating critical information, but when we started to look at how students were engaging with these messages, they were very responsive to this type of communication. So these are just a couple more kind of quick nudges that we sent out during the 2-week closure. So there was a week of spring break and another week of kind of closure that we had. And if you look at the refund information that was going out, 10,000 clicks, right? So these were going out university wide. 10,000 clicks, 3,000 clicks. So students were getting this information and taking the next steps towards these resources that we were trying to provide them as a university. And so this was something we knew in this kind of virtual space was going to be an immense tool for kind of how we would engage students. This next one really speaks to how, you know, as all of us, we're kind of sending our very campus-driven students into this virtual environment. You know, we wanted to make sure that they had the resources, the basic resources they needed to be successful in a virtual space. Did they have computers? Did they have internet? We were concerned that our students might not have those. And so this was a campaign that we sent pretty early on just to check in with students and be like, do you have what you need? And if you don't, you know, where can you kind of get some resources at Georgia State that could assist you with that? So we did want to make sure we were always driving the student to the best resource for their success at the institution. So again, we sent that this was a broad-based message. It was sent to over 10,000 students who were on-campus students who were registered for no online classes. So we knew they weren't familiar with that kind of online environment. Had a huge open rate. Our response rate is almost 90% complete within 2 or 3 hours of the campaign going out. So they stay open a little bit longer, but for the most part, we're getting a bulk of that data kind of very quickly in the communication cycle. Students are clicking on this, right? So they are taking the next step to be like, oh, wait, maybe I really do need support. What is this site that you've created? And then when we looked at how these students actually logged into our learning management system, once those online environments started, it was a huge rate, right? So the good news for us was, okay, they have what they need to log into their courses, right? And so that was kind of our first fear in that, okay, they've got what they need to at least do this stuff online. So that was a really kind of helpful one for us. And unfortunately, COVID-19 did not go away, right? And we very much were in this kind of environment, particularly over the summer, where we were trying to figure out what was fall going to look like, right? And I know all of us were in the same kind of boat with this, but we were able to kind of craft a campaign and send it out to the students. And this was, I think, a good shift for us in COVID, in that it provided a change in our communication. Instead of always trying to get the students to do things, which our bot is pretty effective at, how do we use this space to listen to the student, right? How do we use this space to hear from them what they want? And so this campaign very much asked them, you know, what do you want fall to look like? And the results were rather surprising, right? So I think all of us were kind of thinking students wanted to come back on campus, right? But within, 24 hours, our data kind of showed something different, that maybe they weren't that comfortable kind of walking back onto campus. And how could we take that information and then make better decisions for what fall looked like for our students? So again, this is
only our continuing students, right? So this wasn't representative of the new students, but the new students was actually almost the complete opposite. Many of them wanted to be much more in person. So the power of getting this data is so valuable, and being able to make decisions on modality was an important one for us.
It really was. And I think we've continued to send very like-minded campaigns through the fall. So asking students in your online classes, do you like them to be synchronous or asynchronous? Do you prefer the flexibility to kind of do the work on your own pace, or do you prefer the structure of meeting at a particular time? And to really kind of understand the student perspective a little bit better than we could. The other kind of benefit of this forum is that students they can be a little bit more honest, right? They're going to be more honest with kind of a bot than if someone from your office called, or if someone from the university emailed, right? So they don't see this as, someone from the financial aid office or someone from the Office of Student Success. They see this as Pounce, their friend, trying to really solicit their opinion. This was actually a unique campaign, because this was one of the first times students started texting the bot back saying, what was the answer? Do you know what I mean? Like, what did other people say? So students knew kind of how it was being used, and really felt like this was the way to kind of voice their opinion. So So that's just some examples of how this virtual space really changed how we used our bot. And it went from a very kind of tactical, do these items, to, in addition to that, a way to really kind of listen and get important feedback quickly from students. So just to give you guys a kind of wrap up and give you a little bit of a perspective of kind of where we are and where we're going. Scott did mention we are currently fully scaled to all of our bachelor students as well as to all of our associate students. We are scaled in retention to all of our bachelor students. We are finishing up a randomized control trial with our associate continuing students, which is actually pretty interesting because there are some communication differences. You know, what campaigns do they respond to more, and understanding that learner in a different way than the bachelor students, because we went into that experiment pretty informed about what types of campaigns were successful with Georgia State students. And there has been some shifts in kind of how our associate level students respond differently than bachelors. So that'll be interesting at the end of it. We are also currently piloting nudging at the course level. So we are working with a professor here at Georgia State to use this use text messaging and conversational AI to support course level work, right? Can we affect the outcome in a course level? Can we get students more engaged? There's been some really interesting ways we've already tried to like pilot out those things. We have a full scale randomized control trial planned for that come fall. So we should really be able to see some good data there. Much like everyone else, we are trying to figure out the best way to use web bots and how bots can start to integrate with each other so that everybody can kind of use the bot that best suits them, but yet the bots kind of collaborate. We are working on how does this bot interact differently with online students and graduate admissions and retention of those students. So this is really kind of a scope of where we started, where we've scaled, and how we're continuing to think about different ways to use this technology for really the benefit of the student. So
yeah, and I'll add, Lindsay, I'll add a couple of things here too.
Great.
One is, you know, every year we have high expectations about what our vendor is going to help us be able to do. And one of the things that we've been talking about over the last couple of years, and Lindsay and I were just talking about this yesterday, is we need this to get to a point where there's more self-service functionality. And a good example of that is right now, if a student were to text message Pounce, what is my current tuition and fee balance? Pounce would not be able to provide a response back to the student. We feel like in this day and age, we need to be at that level of self-service with students. And so we're working with the vendor to get there. The other thing that you'll notice from this project plan is that we are using multiple instances of bots utilizing one vendor, right? So we have an admissions bot, a bachelor's and associates, we have a retention bot, we have a web bot. We're trying to get to a point where as close as we possibly can to get to a one bot solution where Pounce can manage questions from different types of audiences. And that's been a little bit more of a struggle than we thought it was going to be, but we're optimistic that at some point that the structure may look over time for Georgia State a little bit differently than you're seeing here. So we're working very, very closely with the vendor on that. The last point I want to make, and it's kind of something going back to the beginning of my presentation, is, and it's something that Lindsay kind of teased a bit, right? We use it to get students to do things. We used it for critical communication, but we also want to have fun with the bot too. And so one of the things that we did in the admissions process not too long ago is we did a kind of a quiz, a movie quiz, you know, all these movies that have been shot in Atlanta and movies that have been actually shot on or near our campuses. And it got a really high response rate. Lots of students engaged with it. Some of the students were surprised at some of the movies that they saw that they didn't realize were actually filmed in Atlanta. And the reason I bring that up, and Lindsay and I, again, were talking about this yesterday, is the very next campaign that went out was our FAFSA campaign. was trying to get students to get their documents in to complete the FAFSA process. And that was one of the highest responses we had ever seen for a campaign. So the nice thing about this is that, one, you can use it as a reminder to students that the bot is there and is always there for them, because sometimes they forget. We hear this all the time. Well, why did you decide to email us or call us instead of using the bot? No, I forgot that Pounce was there. So these kinds of other messages that you do give you an opportunity to remind those students that the bot is there and it's always there and it's there 24/7 at their disposal. And so we've seen some really nice results for campaigns after some of these fun messages that we've sent out to students. So I wanted to make sure I got those few items in that I missed early on.
Those are really good. I'm glad you talked about them. So again, if we are kind of crafting campaigns and ways to message out from the bot, these would kind of be some of our key takeaways. Make sure you do the work to target the message. If it is just a blast, then you're going to lose some kind of impact from students, right? So blasts are effective some of the time, but do what you need to do to make sure every message, the student feels like every message is to them. Speak to students in ways that are timely and set in a way that they're hearing you, right? So if you think about it, you're already sending an email. So how can this speak to the student differently and kind of hit them when they need to hear it, right? So, and then kind of to what Scott was saying, have some fun with it. Use it like a text message. Use it like a student would, and that's going to get just more readability from your audience. So, there, if you would like to test Pounce, out, we've included the link, and there is a white paper available for our work with the persistence bot. So you're welcome to look at that as well.
Yeah, so while we're not doing a live demo here today, as we just discussed on the top of the hour, you do have the ability, if you want to go into the Georgia State website to play around with the web bot and its knowledge base. And so that's available to you. We encourage you to do that. And then, as Lindsay said, we've got the white paper that was written by Lindsay Page, who is a specialist in bots now, certainly, but her area of expertise has been summer melts, and we were pleased to work with her, and we continue to work with her on all of our randomized control trials. So her white paper is available for you as well to download.
Thank you, Lindsay and Scott. I really appreciate the remarks, and it's great. It's absolutely great to sort of see the scope and arc of the work you've done. I would love to take questions from the group. And I think we have a small enough audience. You can unmute if you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and kick the ball off because this is a question I actually am kind of curious about. You sort of showed the process of rolling it out from campus to campus and rolling it out across communities. And I'm really curious, like what the ongoing maintenance is. What's the care and feeding look like from like this nascent little A/B testing to or even random controlled trial out to this really large, essentially institute-wide implementation?
Yeah, so Lindsay, I think I'll jump in first, and then I'll turn it over to you, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the staffing that has actually changed over the years since we've introduced the bot. So when we first deployed the chatbot, we were getting a lot of assistance from the Admit Hub staff, right? They were triaging a lot of the questions that Pounce could not answer for us within that first year of us deploying the bot. We really had roughly about 1.5 positions at that time that were responsible for helping manage the day-to-day activities of the chatbot. So we had an email marketing specialist on the undergraduate admissions team that was responsible, that was built into their job duties and responsibilities. And then we had a graduate assistant who was roughly spending about 20 hours a week or so helping, and they were doing a lot of the triaging with the Admit Hub staff. But one of the things that we did very early on, Jonathan, and I think this is an important part of any campus that's going to consider deploying a chatbot, whether you're looking at a summer melt issue, or you're looking at ways in which you can improve communication to a population of students. I think it's important to get campus buy-in. And so one of the things that we did when we were looking and dealing with the summer melt issue is I had actually formed a committee of representatives from across the university. And we met on a regular basis to talk about summer melt. And so I already had a captured audience of individuals that could help us be more effective in the deployment of our actual chatbot. So ensuring that we had somebody from each of these areas like financial aid and orientation and advising that we could turn to help us seed the knowledge base, think about any questions, think about any campaigns that we need to develop that would fall into their area. And so if you are going to deploy one, perhaps campus-wide, or even if you're just thinking about utilizing it for admissions, I think it's really good to get buy-in from across the institution, because you may be looking at targeting a financial aid issue, but students are going to ask you about all kinds of different things throughout the process. And so I think the more resources, the more individuals that you have involved in the process, the better off that you will be. We have since expanded our team to include 2 email marketing specialists now, where that's built into their job duties and responsibilities. We have 1.5 graduate assistants. So we have from the grant that Lindsay's chatbot is funded from, we get half of a graduate assistant that assists admissions at times with the triaging. But we are now fully responsible for all of our own triaging, all of our own campaign deployment, updating the knowledge base. That's all done on our side, and we certainly work with AdmitHub staff still, but they're not giving us that same level of support. So we definitely needed to do that. And then certainly when you're testing, and you should be testing the bot often, we get our admissions team, we get our telecounselors, we get our tour guides involved in that process. And there'll be days where we have them sitting, typing questions in to make sure that things are working the way that they should. Are there more questions and answers that we need to add to the knowledge base? And the nice thing is, the largest percentage of the questions that have been added to our knowledge base have come from prospective prospects, from applicants, from admitted students. And that's over time really how our knowledge base has grown considerably. Lindsay?
And just to piggyback off that a little bit, it really builds on itself. You know, Scott did such a great job laying that foundation. For persistence purposes, we still have those liaisons in those departments, right? So once you kind of establish this is the communication plan and this is the knowledge, those relationships are really easy to maintain, right? And to kind of keep that flow going. You know, we send over to their offices, you know, hey, financial aid, here's what we have planned for you this month. Is everything still on track there? They say, they give a sign off, and then we execute it. For the persistence bot, we are grant funded at this point. So we have had the luxury of having a little bit larger staff. So we have 3 full-time staff members and currently 5 graduate assistants. One of those graduate assistants is very dedicated to the academic course nudging project. So, and we've needed that staff, especially as we do some of the research work where we're really trying to pull larger data sets, pull together kind of outcome data and make sure that that is flowing to our researcher in a kind of an appropriate way. So what's been beneficial, and so kind of what Scott said, is as we've kind of titrated up the population, that's when you can really build onto your bot and your knowledge base. So like as you start to grow the population, every time you launch the bot, it's going to generate a different kind of set of student questions. And that gives you the ability to either affirm your bot with those answers or redirect your bot, right? So if he was getting that answer wrong, or we need to branch that off as students ask more nuances in a particular area, once that work is done, right? Once we branched out into those tiny kind of tributaries, it's done, right? And so the bot has been able to handle more nuanced questions a little bit faster. There are some glitches in that, right? So COVID-19 is a great example when all of a sudden he had to learn a whole new set of knowledge and you have to kind of unlearn these and relearn these. But But in general, every semester, the bot gets better and smarter in a way to kind of, as he evolves, as we're kind of rolling it out to different elements of the population. So.
Thanks. So there's a question in the chat. And so Shreyas Desai from Atlanta Metro, welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. There's actually two questions there from it. I'm going to pitch the first two, and I'm going to actually note that the second half of that I think is actually more in Tracy Ireland's wheelhouse. But the question Shreyas is asking is would you please tell us the cost of using the bot? And so I'm assuming there's both the upfront cost and the sort of ongoing costs.
Yeah, so in admissions, we're spending about $75,000 for our bots. At Perimeter, we're communicating with well over 5,000 students. On the Atlanta campus, well over 30,000 students.
Is the pricing for this for the bot, or is it per the sort of the volume of use? I mean, how's the pricing structure for an institution considering it? What's the way that which the pricing gets structured?
The pricing structure for our bot is based on the users. Because we deliver most of this messaging via text message, it's however many users are kind of loaded for text messages. You can send as many text messages as you need to that user, but you're really kind of paying per user. I know some are different. Some bots base it on like conversations. Some bots base it on individual text. So every text back and forth. So if you're thinking about a chat bot, you know, that's a great question to ask. You know, how is the pricing set up just so that you can choose the best option for your university?
You're muted, Jonathan.
And I was trying very deftly to sort of hit the space bar to unmute myself, and it was not. I must have been in a different window because there's something that's just going. So another one in the Amit Singh is asking, do you have one product at MidHub or are they multiple products? So it sounds like you have like multiple bots, but they're all at MidHub.
Yeah.
And how do your bots overlap, like interact, or are they sort of isolated and separated?
As of right now, we've been able to keep them pretty separated because they're kind of geared towards a particular population, whether that's incoming associate level students or continuing bachelor level students. And I think part of that multiple bot situation has just been how we've evolved our bot strategy along with the vendor, because we were one of their, if not their first partner. And so to make sure they're kind of catching up with us, I think we're working through some strategies with them now to consolidate that a little bit. And they've done a pretty good job in terms of crafting some features in the product that will let us do that in a more streamlined manner. Some personalization answers, and then we could tag students in terms of like, this is an associate student, so they get this associate answer. This is a bachelor level student, so they get this type of an answer. So we're not quite there yet, but we're on our way.
And does the bot know by the inbound number, like who the student is?
He does.
Yeah.
Well,
in the closed bot situation, I think it's good to define open bot, closed bot. So web bots are open bots. Anybody can text message, communicate with the web bot, versus the closed bot where a student receives a text message from us that then allows them and gives them access to our closed bot. There is that difference. So Pounce does recognize that phone number in the closed bot situation.
Great. Well, I'm gonna go. So Kevin George, I know you're being very targeted in your approach to texting, but could you give an estimate of how often you're engaging individual students through text? For example, on average, each student would receive a text once a week, once a month, once every other month.
We get that question a lot. So on average, about once a week. There are kind of my limit is you never want a student to get more than 3 text messages a week. And if you are sending 3, you better make sure that the student sees all of those as critical messages to them, right? So you do get a little bit more leeway to communicate with a student when they feel like it is personal to them. So personalized messages you can send more of in a week, but on average, I'd say students get about a message a week. Students who need more messages a week will get more messages a week. Students who maybe aren't completing those critical enrollment tasks. But if a student's on track, then, we get the benefit of just kind of messaging them once a week, maybe even every other week, just kind of depending on times in the semester. So it definitely follows kind of an academic calendar for us.
I think we're pretty much the same. We try to not do more than 3 a week and at least one a week.
And so any concern with text fatigue, especially as the number of text outreach from businesses, marketing continues to increase? Said Rob Friedhoff, who is somebody who sends a lot of texts.
That's a good question. My one kind of assurement in this space is when we did an analysis on what were students texting back to the bot, the number one thing they texted back by far was thank you. It was expressions of like gratitude, right? So this idea of still the number one kind of sentiment coming into the bot is appreciation for the texts that are going out. I think we might be okay. So everybody's always a little bit concerned about text fatigue, as we should be, because we should be mindful of it. But we keep an eye on kind of what's coming into the bot and how, what's triggering students to opt out of the bot, like leave the bot, because that's a tricky kind of balance to strike too. So, yeah.
Somewhat related to this, Lucy Harrison with Galileo is noting that she gets a lot of spam texts more and more recently. And so how do you ensure that students know the text messages are coming from you? How is it that they know it's an official source?
For starters, I think using their name a little bit more often, like we use the student's name. And matter of fact, we actually use their preferred name at Georgia State, right? So if they want to be called Tim or whatever it is, then we call them Tim. And additionally, we keep reminding the student who we are, so we try to not go more than a month without saying, hi, Lindsay, Pounce here, so we'll keep have the bot refer back to himself just so it doesn't get lost in, all the text they do have. So we call the bot by name and we call the student by name. And I think that kind of gives us more permission to speak to the student. So.
Yep.
And you're using this, do you use that bot for early alerts as well?
We do use the bot for early alert. And that was actually the coaching message you saw earlier. That was for an early alert targeted campaign where we were trying to get students who had been alerted, had been given an early alert. We're trying to get them in to see an academic coach. And so that was actually targeted for early alert.
I want to get to Tracy in a second, but I want to come back to something that just occurred to me, and it's somewhat related to a conversation we've had. There's a building connecting with community session next week that somewhat overlaps with this. But one of the things that came up when we were talking in the planning on this was that institution does outreach, does phone outreach and also text outreach to campuses, and the numbers are wrong. The numbers are either not right in the banner system at all, or the student has changed their phone number. And so, like, what sort of, I mean, you're a big campus, you've got 50,000 students. What's your miss rate, and also how much updating you constantly? So, and how do you sort of manage that process?
Yeah, so only for retention students, only about 1% of the messages don't go through that we send out. A lot of times, especially early on, we'll get messages that say, this isn't the student, it's his mom. Can you text him at this number? Right? So it's maybe parents who were listed as the communicator who are now quickly trying to transition this over to their student. And so we make the change in our system and then give them, so we make the change in our texting system, and then we make sure that the student has the information on how to formally change it inside their student profile, because we don't change it in their student profile, but we make sure they know how to, and we make sure we're texting the correct person.
Yeah, and in admissions, Jonathan, we get a bounce rate report back from AdmitHub too. We have the ability to see the numbers that didn't work. And so then our admissions team will then reach out to the students to see if they want to update their phone number with us. So we're being proactive on that front as well.
No, and I appreciate you both mentioning that sort of the process in which it has to be updated too, because it's not like someone can just go in and update the number. It's part of there's a FERPA restriction in terms of what number and what information you can share with what. So, great. So I'm gonna pivot here a bit. I'm gonna invite my colleague Tracy Ireland to talk a bit about some of the work he's been working on and doing with institutions around campus logic and chatbots there, and so virtual advisor. So Tracy, if you'll take it away.
Jonathan, thank you. And before I begin, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the work that Georgia State has done with Lindsay and Scott and James Blackburn and the team there. They have really pioneered chatbot use at institutions, not only, of course, in Georgia, but even across the country. So their work is noted, and their work has informed what we have done at the system office with chatbots. So with that, I want to talk to you just for a minute about Virtual Advisor and what that is and how we got there. But first, you might remember about 2 years ago, in fact, it's almost 2 years ago to the month, we announced the start of a program called No More Borrow Less, and that program had several goals to it, and you can see them there on your screen. You know, to streamline and standardize the financial aid process, timely and accurate information, to give students and families information about sound borrowing, and to help them understand what debt payments and whatnot look like when they graduate. You know this, I'm sure, intuitively, but students just simply don't know, and they don't pay attention to what borrowing does. You see that in the news now. So as part of No More Borrow Less, we've done a number of things, and the very first thing was automating FAFSA verification, and we partnered with a company called Campus Logic, as you heard Jonathan mention, and are using their product Student Forms for FAFSA verification. And if you've ever done your own taxes, it's much like using TurboTax. If you have to provide further information about that, we contact the student via email or text or however way that is, ask the student the questions they need to answer. They fill out the form online and sign it online, and it comes back to the campus virtually for processing. You also probably are aware of the student debt letter program that started about a year ago. And in that, we send a student, the institution sends a student at least annually, maybe more often, information about how much they owe in student loans. And we all know that students don't pay any attention to that. So the idea is to get this information in front of students sooner so that they can start tracking on that as early as the end of their freshman year. We tell them what their federal debt looks like. We're telling them what their campus-based debt looks like, state student loans if they have any, et cetera. We've also deployed video content that institutions can use to embed in email communications or websites, or even display it on monitors in the offices if they so choose. And this content ranges, it's a robust library of videos that talk about financial aid or admission or any number of other topics. Just recently deployed is the Student Aid Offer Letter, which is a unified offer letter for all 26 USG campuses to use. It tells students what their financial aid is that they're being offered. It tells them what their cost of attendance is, both direct and indirect. It tells them about borrowing, embeds videos, and again, lets them use the chatbot if they wish. And finally, what we're talking about today is Virtual Advisor, or our artificial intelligence chatbot. And one other thing I want to mention that wraps around all of that is an analytics product that helps institutions and the system have insight as to what's going on with these communications. So we know, for example, and you've heard Lindsay and Scott talk about this, and Jonathan as well, about open rates and what time of day students will read emails or text messages, how quickly campaigns get looked at by students. The analytics that are provided here help give you insight into all of that so you can adjust and make change. So moving more into Virtual Advisor, what is it? Well, Virtual Advisor is the university system's web-based artificial intelligence-driven interactive supports tool. In other words, it's a chatbot. Now, at the very beginning of this session, you heard Jonathan say, and this is interesting to me, that there's a lot of different chatbot opportunities out there today, and that's true. However, 2.5, 3 years ago, when we started the No More Borrow Less program, and we're talking about a chatbot, it was a very different landscape. And I'm sure Lindsay and Scott will tell you that there was very few vendors at the time out there. Today, there's countless vendors that are offering chatbot services. A Virtual Advisor with Campus Logic is what the system office ended on. We're pleased to show you the upcoming features of it. So how do chatbots help you? Well, as you heard Scott and Lindsay say, at its very basic form, a chatbot answers routine, repetitive questions, right? Where's the dining hall? How do I get to financial aid? What's a FAFSA? Any of those kind of questions that you want it to answer, it can do. It frees up your financial aid folks, your advisors in financial aid, to perform that one-on-one high value advising to students that helps drive enrollment and retention, those students that need that extra special attention. So why a chatbot? Well, as you heard Scott and Lindsay mention, 24/7 is the #1 benefit of a chatbot. According to millennials, that's what they want, is 24/7 access to information. It's reasonable to expect 80% of routine questions to be handled by your chatbot in that area. Now, this is really interesting to me. 70% of consumers say that they prefer messaging over calling. And even further than that, those same people that prefer messaging specific to them. So giving them information about them, not just canned answers. And you have also heard, and we've seen as well, that text messages have an extremely high rate of opening, 98%, whereas emails can be as low as 20. Thankfully, we've seen it a little higher, but texting is definitely where it's at when it comes to reaching our students. So, features of Virtual Advisor. Well, as I mentioned already, 24/7, 365 virtual advising. It has 60 languages built into it. Even, you're going to die, Klingon, for those of you who are Star Trek fans. It actually has Klingon built into it. Virtual Advisor comes pre-trained with financial aid questions and answers for federal student aid. There's hundreds upon hundreds of questions that it comes out of the box with. It comes with loaded dynamic videos and suggested next steps for students. For example, a student may get their offer letter, but they may not know what they need to do next. Well, Virtual Advisor can help them figure that out. It doesn't do just FAQ, it does dialogue with students. Remember, we mentioned students really prefer to have that conversational experience, not just a question back. Virtual Advisor is text, website, and social media ready out of the box. But it's even more than a chatbot. It does support student-specific conversations. So if a student wants to know what's my balance, or what's the status of my FAFSA, how many hours I'm enrolled for, it can answer those questions directly back to the student, so long, of course, as the student is authenticated with the institution. It requires little to no training to get up and running. It's always up to date on program regulations for federal student aid. That comes out of the box, and our vendor maintains that. It optimizes your workflow at your school. And again, it provides visibility into advising efforts across multiple departments. Now, it also comes with what we're calling the Advising Command Center. And that's real-time conversation monitoring that you can do watching your students interact with your chatbot. Or if your students end up interacting with your staff, it does an intelligent handoff. Staff can tag team with Virtual Advisor when students need personal human intervention. It also supports two-way live messaging that also supports that advisor intervention when needed. It stores conversation transcripts, and it allows you to search and retrieve those as well. So you've heard a lot about proactive outreach. Virtual Advisor comes out of the box with easy-to-use list builders, which allows you to do one-to-one or one-to-many messaging, including text or email. Targeted mobile text nudges also are available out of the box, and unified inboxes for mobile and advising for messaging. Now, Virtual Advisor is also fully integrated with all Campus Logic services. It provides native support for them right out of the box. So as you know, and as you heard me mention earlier in the slide deck, a number of these services we already offer to our institutions. So Virtual Advisor integrates completely with Campus Communicator. It integrates completely with student forums. And if you've deployed Scholarship Universe or Sponsored Scholar, it will also integrate with them. Scholarship Universe, for example, is a scholarship search service. We kind of think of it as the match.com of scholarships. And students can automatically get matched up to different types of scholarship programs that are in the database, and they can automatically apply for them. Well, if they're already authenticated, then that tends to help them do that. So I want to take a quick look at one of the chatbots we've deployed. We've deployed financial aid chatbots at all 26 institutions so far. And I'm going to show you what it looks like for a student at UGA when they see Archie. Archie is their chatbot. So what you see on your screen now is a financial aid offer letter that UGA will be sending to its students. And while that's really great, and I wish we had time to go over all the features of the unified offer letter, suffice to say that it does show the student aid funds that they're being awarded and what their cost of attendance is. But here's the important thing for today is down at the bottom right, you see Archie there. So if a student has a question, they simply click on Archie and they tell Archie what's the question. He'll pop up and say, how can I help you? They type their question there in the bottom box, and Archie will respond back with the response. So for example, this student wants to know what direct cost is. Archie says, hey, that's a great question. Here's what it is. It's billable items you pay directly to the school. Oh, by the way, here's a little video on the subject. If you want to take a look at that, maybe that'll help explain. So that's just one example of many of the questions and answers and service that can come out of Virtual Advisor. So one other thing that I want to mention that Virtual Advisor is provided to all university system institutions, and deployment is underway now. We've deployed in 3 cohorts. Every institution has it deployed and are working with it in some way or another. That is provided to university system institutions by the system office at no charge. So the USG is paying for the annual subscription price on that. You can also use this in any other unit or area on campus at no additional subscription cost. So you can use it for admission, for housing, for your registrar, for parking, really anything you want to do with it, you can do, and it doesn't cost any additional subscription cost. Again, the analytics that I mentioned before monitor its usage, they help gauge its effectiveness, and they guide future use cases, right? So if you find out, for example, we've seen students like to read email on Sunday afternoons for some strange reason, but they read them at Sunday afternoons about 4 o'clock, I guess getting ready for the week. However, we know that text messages get read within the first hour and then tend to trail off pretty sharply after that. So these types of analytics can help our institutions, help you develop cases and programs and campaigns that really are designed for your students. And of course, one of the things we've heard from students all along was that they wanted the services to meet them where they are, right? So instead of sending students a paper letter that says, hey, here's what your financial aid offer is, we're telling them via electronic means, right? A digital offer letter that comes right on their device. So we get that information out to websites, offer letters, social media, right? So just for fun, here's the institutions that have rolled out Virtual Advisor, and this is the order in which we've done a group 1, group 2, and group 3. And like I mentioned, all of our institutions now have this available to them in their financial aid world. About 5 schools have opened it up outside of financial aid, which means their campus at large is using it. And what we've seen in a very short period of time, and what Georgia State, Scott and Lindsay alluded to, was that the chatbot is able to answer and has answered thousands and thousands of questions so far. So what we've seen, and we refer to one question, or we refer to one interaction as a conversation, and after the conversation, then there are questions or messaging that goes back and forth in there. You heard Scott and Lindsay talk about too many text messages can give text fatigue, and that's very true. What we've seen is there's about 5 to 6 text interactions in a conversation with a student. So one question often leads to another, which is great. So we've seen it roll up very quickly, adding thousands and thousands of questions being answered, and we're thrilled about that. So love to help you with your deployment of Virtual Advisor, and would love to take questions about that. You have my contact information on the screen there, as well as Rich Loftus. We have both co-led the deployment of all of these features of No More Borrow Less, but including Virtual Advisor. So I know I ran through those features and information pretty quickly, but Jonathan, do we have time for questions, or are there questions in the chat?
So we do have time for questions, and we have a question in the chat from Albany State, Kimberly Burgess, saying, I do not see our school among the 3 groups for Virtual Advisor. So how do we get involved?
One moment, I am sure that you are there.
It's on the middle tile.
Thank you so much. Yes. So Albany State did deploy Virtual Advisor for financial aid, probably right before the Christmas holiday.
So, and when did Group 3 roll out?
It's rolling now. We launched Group 3 right after the first of the year. So all of those institutions, and again, Virtual Advisor is easy to deploy. Because it's handled by the vendor, it's then, as we've talked about, care and feeding that starts from there, right? So institutions have to make sure that it's counterintuitive, but They have to pick their colors and their logo that they want to appear. They want to have to name their bot, of course, which they have been pretty neat. As you know, Georgia State's is Pounce and UGA is Archie, and there's many others. So we think most of our institutions are already at least live within financial aid, meaning internally to the Campus Logic suite of products. But as we move along, then that will come out of that.
So first question, how does the virtual advisor platform compare to, say, Signalvine?
To compare to what?
Signalvine?
Is that a vendor of chatbots?
I'm passing along a question. I'm not entirely sure, but Paul Johnson asked it. Maybe it may be that this is a good conversation to take directly. It is getting to that point though where there's a lot of platforms out there for doing this exact work. So
There are, yes.
Follow-up question. So it's and Paul, is it a texting? Paul, do you want to unmute and you can sort of, or not?
Tracy, this is James. I might be able to just clarify that. So Signalvine, several schools are using it as a text platform. So they're just text messaging across. Signalvine has been very interested in getting into the chatbot space and has been working with several schools in that space. I would say that both AdmitHub and Campus Logic is different in just text-based. Text messaging, it requires a human to interact. In both chatbots, the interaction is with a bot. So it's pre-programmed responses that are intelligent responses. So I think that's the big difference between Signalvine in a text message mode versus both AdmitHub and Campus Logic's chatbot mode.
I appreciate that, James. That's right.
So can AdmitHub and Virtual Advisor, this is another question, can AdmitHub and Virtual Advisor integrate? In other words, if a student asks a financial aid question in AdmitHub, can the answer be pulled from the Virtual Advisor, or do they need knowledge base populated in both bots?
So earlier in the session, Lindsay and Scott, I think, alluded to that, and that's something that we're very interested in as well. No, I don't think today that one bot doesn't typically talk to another bot. We've actually talked to Campus Logic about that, and early on we talked to AdmitHub about that as well. So I think that's coming, and I think that the chatbot vendors are going to have to figure that out as time goes on.
Yeah, to speak to that a little bit, Georgia State is trying to have the conversation in terms of, how can these bots exist that are specialized, and then what's the role of a directional bot, right? So is there another bot that can kind of better direct to these other, to the financial aid bot, to the registration bot, where these can maybe solve and utilize some of our management systems, where they're pulling balance information, they're authenticated. So how do we kind of get these bots to all in the same sandbox and playing together effectively, because students are using them in kind of different capacities. So that's definitely something we're trying to wrap our hands around and get vendors to respond to it as well.
In today's world with Virtual Advisor, it can pull information on the specific students' status or balance or whatnot. It's not extremely elegant for those of you that do that kind of work, but it will come to the point, and we're looking at utilizing built-in banner functionality so that it can do that in real time. It's not quite there, but it is there that it can do that specific stuff. But again, bot to bot. And one of the things that kind of drives this interest in this is Georgia Student Finance Commission, the state agency that administers HOPE, is launching their own chatbot. And it just happens to be a virtual advisor-based chatbot. Well, they're going to have all the state program questions you'll ever want. If we can't answer a state program question, then we should be able to ask that bot the question and then give the answer back. So that's just a good use case example, one of many.
So this question came in shortly after Georgia State, and this is actually, it's an interesting question. Colin Potts from Georgia Tech notes, that it's sweet that the Georgia State students give appreciative feedback, but who says who says thank you to a computer program? So that they understand they're dealing with a bot, not a real person. Earlier they said they disclose more than they would with people, so there's a distinction, but is there a concern that students may disclose too much because they think no one ever reads the dialogue?
Yeah, so one of the cool things about Pounce is that he's very forthcoming with the fact that he's a bot, right? So if a student asks a question that might be a little bit too much information for the bot to sort out, Pounce will respond with, I'm a bot. Let me get a human, right? So it is that kind of link to human support that students do understand. We will have students thank Pounce. So they will say, thank you, Pounce, right? So they understand that this is not a person. We will also have students to start to disclose too much information. And then when we start to intervene, the student will be like, oh, I didn't know this was a person. And it's like, well, we're just checking on, just checking on you. How are you? So I think students do understand it as a bot, and that if they do start to disclose information, the bot is pretty forthcoming and quick to say, let me loop a human in. We'll also get some no human, right? So they try to undo this whole like human trigger. We try to be respectful of those, like if we see it, if we need to escalate it, we escalate it. And otherwise we let students kind of maintain that relationship that they have with Pounce. And, I feel good that students feel comfortable enough with that technology to kind of interact with him that way.
Yeah, and we also have built into the knowledge-based sensitive topic. So if a student does hit on something like suicide or something along those lines, we do have the ability to have a human being intervene and will intervene. Those issues will go to a staff member, and a staff member will be able to reach out to the students too. So I thought that was important to note.
We also track all the questions that are asked most frequently, and you'd be surprised what the students are willing to ask a chatbot that they would never ask a person. It's interesting.
I hate to say it, Jonathan, but you're muted.
And that's probably for the best. Tracy, with the sort of system-wide rollout of the virtual advisor product, does that create a sort of a collective master list of questions and questions and answers?
It does. That's a great question. So as I mentioned, with virtual advisor, it comes out of the box with most federal student aid questions you're going to want. And then the system office provided the state program aid questions. And then of course, institutions are free on their own to add whatever else that they would like specific to their campus. We would never want to prescribe that, but we want to make sure that the ability and the functionality is there. And that goes kind of hand in hand with the ability for institutions to expand the use of this bot well beyond financial aid.
Great. For both systems, Virtual Advisor and MidHub, how is target messaging being executed? Are contact lists being pulled on an ad hoc basis, or are the systems generating contact lists based on criteria? Great question.
I'll go first if you want, and then the Georgia State folks can talk about how they're doing it. So the answer is that I think it's both. You can generate a list of students you want to send a particular message to or campaign to. Virtual Advisor needs very little information to do that, a name and a phone number or email address or both. It will send messaging to email and text at the same time. So it is ad hoc, but I could see very, very soon down the road where it would also be automatic, system generated.
For the persistent students at Georgia State, it does both as well, right? So we definitely craft our own list, but the system does have the capability for us to load a list with certain attributes and then kind of query off of that, right? So if you wanted, all biology first year majors with this GPA starting this semester to get a message, you could kind of filter on whatever functions you choose to load in on the student contact. I actually think Scott's team pulls that data kind of live out of Slate. So there is like a Slate integration.
Yeah, so we share information across the platform. So I think it's important to note that there's a separate dashboard on the AdmitHub side. And so we've set it up where through a secure FTP that we have data going over to Slate. We just to the dashboard. We just Slate has been a little bit more open in terms of its API, and so vendors now are working on ways to do a better job of actually getting data over, and we just completed that process. So we have data going over much more real time than where we were previously. So I'm excited about that, and we have the ability, as both Tracy and Lindsay said, to either extract a list of the exact students that we want it to go to, or we have a situation where a lot of the data now is living in, and we can use AdmitHub's filtering capabilities to find a population of student in their dashboard as well, based on all of the Georgia State attributes that we bring over into the system.
So I think, Jonathan, if I may, I'd like to add one thing, and I think that that deployment of something like this can be overwhelming. I mean, the truth of the matter is that resource levels at institutions varies, and I want to make sure that schools that are thinking about deploying a chatbot beyond financial aid or beyond where they have one today, do it in small pieces. Don't try to eat the entire. I forget the analogy, but don't bite off so much.
The elephant.
Don't try to eat the whole elephant at once, right? How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So make sure that the most important thing, I think, is that it is going to require some care and feeding, and you have to plan for that, because the last thing you want is to have your website that's out of date, and then to have your chatbot that is also telling last year's Pell tables or whatever it may be, right? You will not have to worry about that with financial aid, but you will with other areas. So I'm rambling a bit, Jonathan. You'll have to stop me now. But
no, but it actually, so that actually leads me to what I think is probably, unless something else comes in the chat, sort of a final question for Scott and Lindsay. And this is, so now you've got sort of you've got a bit of a broader campus approach, and looking at where you are now, would you still have started in admissions, or are there other places you would start with the chatbot?
I think no question, and I'll start that we would have started in admissions, because I definitely would have started in admissions. We were trying to tackle a very specific issue, and we felt like that targeting admissions first, instead of trying to get it to a larger population like your whole student body, this allowed us to really use admissions as a test case to see if this could work. And as we saw the success, and then we asked the students, do you want us to continue beyond the admissions process? It gave us the validation that this could work beyond admissions. So yes, I think in hindsight here, we still would have started in admissions.
And admissions just provides such a great in with the university, right? So by the time we're messaging the students, they already have an established relationship with Pounce and texting at the university that is informative and leads them to the next step, but also fun and engaging and encouraging them for housing. And so the students already asked this wide range of questions to the bot. What can I bring a lizard to my dorm? And also, when is FAFSA due? And so they've already kind of established what they can and can't ask the bot. And then we just kind of keep that relationship going through their college experience. And, they might use it differently, but, we build on the relationship that Scott's able to establish with those incoming students.
Well, thank you both. I appreciate it. Thank you all. I appreciate it. I don't see any more questions in the chat. We are 7 minutes ahead of schedule, which is unusual for me, and I'm going to go ahead and own the victory here. Thank you so much to all of you for bringing this to us. It's an interesting and fascinating subject, and again, it's something that I think is a really powerful tool for sort of effectively connecting with and communicating with our students, and also sort of minimizing some of the load that may affect on other parts of your campus. So again, with that, I want to thank you all. Again, encourage you all to just continue to join us throughout the rest of this week. We've got a session at 2:30 on maintaining momentum with pathways, maps, and fuller schedules. We have picking up with 2 sessions on Friday, and then a full week of programming next week as well, if that's not going to make you exhausted enough. Thank you all so much for your time today, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.